First of all, I would like to welcome you all on behalf of our president, Mr. Nick Camarano, who's sitting here, and our board of governors. And so it's a pleasure to have this group back at the club, and I'm delighted that we have a great day for you. So it should be a lot of great help to do this. Secondly, I'd like to send the regards from our NCA staff. Sue Wagerson recently underwent some hip surgery, so she was unable to be with us today. And Brad is out there stomping, as he always does, spreading the gospel to anyone and everyone that can hear. And so they asked if I might fill in for today. It's my pleasure to be here. Essentially, Gene talked about the mission of NCA, and it is really to represent you, the clubs, the leadership of the clubs, at the national level, but also state and the local legislation when and if that becomes an opportunity or a problem for you. And so I think somewhat speaking to many of the people that are members already of the National Club Association, but if you're not, I hope that maybe you will consider that. We'll talk a little bit later about that. So basically we're out there to represent the legal, legislative, and the business interests of the club. And so it is an association representing the club itself. And that's apart from all the other associations that represent a lot of constituencies within the club itself. Today I'd like to talk about three different primary issues that are sort of really hot and heavy on the national scene. One being the Healthcare Reform Act, second being the H-2B wage regulations, and some certain things that have happened recently in that, and then the National Labor Relations Board regulations, and so they've been very active as well. So just sort of kick it off with the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. It's now about 18 months into this program, and fortunately there has not been much harm done quite yet, but stay tuned. So we already are required, as you know, to extend coverage to our employees' children up to age 26. Also, the rules limiting previous conditions has been dropped, and so they can't be denied on that basis. And that's not altogether bad things. I think all of us are somewhat in support of that, other than it takes some choices away from us and also adds to the cost of things. What has also happened recently, which is a positive sign, is there were some regulations regarding filing 1099s, extending it from having to do it somewhat on an annual basis to anyone, or whenever we purchase things in excess of $600 to an independent contractor or somebody we are recorded as a corporation per se. We have to send out 1099 to both the government and to that person. And so I felt that that was really a substantial burden potentially for small businesses, and on one of the rare occasions both the House and the Senate both agreed, and actually the President signed that, and so that was withdrawn. And it's a positive move, but in reality it's a very, very small portion of this whole legislation. Also, we got a delay this past year for the requirement that we record health care costs, employee health care costs on their W-2s. And so it was to go into effect this year. We pushed 1 year. So in 2012, or when we give those W-2s in 2013, we're going to have to record all of the costs of health care for an individual employee. Personally, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And as a matter of fact, we're moving towards trying to put the ongoing costs on the check so employees have some idea of what actually health care costs. Exactly what the government has in mind and why they figured this will maybe push people to do something else, the employees to go to the exchanges, I'm not sure. There's probably some rationale there that underseeds this all, but we'll see where that goes. So, no harm, no foul yet. However, there's a couple things going into effect. 2012, if you haven't already designated your nursing break room, you should run back to your clubs and make sure you establish where that is. So as of January 1st, 2012, employees that are nursing must be given an ample opportunity to take a break whenever and for whatever duration they think is necessary. And you are to provide a break room for them to do that. It cannot be a bathroom. It cannot have any public exposure. It has to be totally private. And we're all required to do that. So you figure out where that's going to go. So that's just sort of the 2012 sort of gap time here, although we've got to start preparing for the exchanges and start getting used to what we're going to be able to tell our employees ultimately as when we go into the health exchange programs. In 2013, there's the new tax on medical devices, 2.9%, that manufactured medical devices are going to have to pay the government. So obviously there's going to be some costs passed on to the consumer. There will be a 3.8% new tax on interest income and investments and dividends, and that's for any person who is makes over $200,000 with a family makes $250,000. And so obviously there's some attempts here to start offsetting what the potential future costs of these programs are. And so that should be interest to a number of your members. And then also a 0.9% increase in the Medicare tax that we'll have to pay, everyone will have to pay. 2014, the new employee health care mandates. That's when they really go into effect. And in 2013, you're going to have to start preparing your clubs for that. So far, the rule only applies to clubs with 50 employees or more. However, in some of the other legislations coming down and regulations, they're finding ways how to incorporate seasonal employees and part-time employees into the count. We'll talk about that very shortly. And so I think the average number of employees in Met clubs from the 2009 survey is about 38 full-time employees. There's about 53 that are seasonal and some 35 or something that are part-time. So somehow it may be that we wouldn't escape this, and even if we do, it's going to be interesting to see what's available from our insurance companies at that time. And of course, in 2014, they'll also go to start putting fees on insurance policy sales, so that'll help push things up. Then stay tuned for 2018. So this is a nice little thing from this. That's when the 40% tax on expensive healthcare programs go into effect. And so if you're paying over $10,200 for employees' individual coverage at that time, there'll be a 40% tax to you on everything in excess of that. And if you're paying family medical coverage, it will be on anything in excess of $27,500. Now that seems like a fairly large number and probably won't have an impact, but according to the 2009 survey of the UGA, which once again is on your desk back at your clubs, you can fill that out and update it. Currently clubs are paying about $5,000 for individual coverage on an annual basis and $14,000 for family coverage. So if we just put the 10, 15, 20% likely increases, plus about 3% cost for all of these other regulations that we go on top, it probably won't be long until we get to those numbers. So, good luck to us, 2014. And I just dropped my answer. So, let me move the slides forward here a little bit. So I told you pretty much what's coming up, as it looks, with the way Congress is now composed, we're not going to have any real changes in the healthcare legislations in the near term. And if we can muster enough support to make any changes within Congress, the president would veto that. So then you need a major vote. So that's not happening. And I think as Brad has said in the past, even if it did, it's not likely that our legislators are going to want to tackle this again. So, so the final hope may be in the courts. And so the Congress, I should say, the government has been sued by a number of states individually, and there were 5 district court decisions that came out this past year, and 3 of them voted in favor of basically the government regulations, and 2 supported sort of industries' concerns about this. And so the court suits were basically around 2 things. One was the constitutionality of mandates, and so can the government impose individual mandates that we must purchase healthcare. The second part of that was, is the whole law constitutional? And so I guess in the writing of this long document, they forgot to include the state boilerplate that sort of says, you know, if any part of this should be judged to be unconstitutional, the rest is automatically not. So apparently, there's some case to be made that if they can mandate, or if the courts find that it's unconstitutional, then the whole program could be thrown out. And there's so many other elements other than just the insurance side, just the mandate side, that I think everybody, or at least seemingly a large amount of the population, would like to see this thing start over. Let's rebuild it and let's work together. But that isn't likely to happen. We'll see. So the first one went to the first suits went on, and we're now at Circuit Court of Appeals, and we've had two decisions there. One was favorable to the government's position, and a 2-to-1 decision. They found that the law was constitutional, and that part of then the case was constitutional. In the Florida Circuit Court, which represented a case by 26 states, judges ruled 2-to-1 against the government, finding that the law, the mandate, was unconstitutional. However, they decided that, in fact, that did not necessarily throw out the whole bill, and so they ruled that that could still be constitutional, remainder of that. So that was sort of a mixed victory. So on it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's supposed to hear oral arguments about the case by the end of this year. And they will hear it, and they're supposed to come out with maybe a decision by the summer. So we should be hearing fairly soon what that's going to be, and how it turns out is really anybody's guess at this point. So stay tuned. So what we can't necessarily legislate, we can always regulate, right? So we've got a lot of control over the different agencies of our government and the H-2B regulations. There has been a movement for quite some time to try and really push the H-2B program out, and that's the international seasonal employees. The visas are good for up to 3 years, and you can only stay in one place for 6 months, and then you got to move on. But there's a fair number of industries, including the club industry, that rely upon H-2B visa people. And so, just a quick show of hands: how many people here? How many clubs actually have H-2B people? Okay, so, this is not totally representative of our community here, but you see there's a sizable number of clubs that rely upon them. And so there's a bunch of new regulations that now are pushing that to maybe be something that we'll have to deal with. We, for one, here in Westchester, so we have a program with 7 H-2Bs this past summer. And I've done some pre-sort of surveying, and that's probably a smaller number, actually, because we've got clubs with 17, 20 H-2B employees. And basically we're looking to bring them in the spring and then keep them in the fall, and then they'll move to Florida clubs or someplace else. And so it works really well with our system. So last year we received notification from the Department of Labor that we had to raise the minimum wage for our H-2Bs. And so we were required to go to $13.50 as a minimum starting wage for H-2B. Also, at that time, they invoked some new rules in terms of the cost. And so, in fact, if you have H-2Bs, we must now pay for their transportation, we have to pay for their meals, we have to pay for their visa application, and so they're starting to lay all the costs really on the employers. With the new regulations, they are saying that, in fact, if you have an H-2B employee and any benefit that you provide the H-2B visa employees to, you must also give to other seasonal workers. So if you should be bringing a seasonal worker in from another state or whatever, you have to pay the transportation. And there's some question that if you provide housing to your current H-2Bs, that maybe you have to provide housing to other seasonal employees. So it's getting really sort of complicated. So shortly into the summer, we got another notification from the DOL, and they said, oh, in your area, we're doing a new evaluation, and they've got a host of different means that they can evaluate it, but they determined that the living sort of wage here for this classification of employees, our food service, was $15.50 an hour. And so they notified us that by September 30th, I think it was originally, that we'd have to raise everybody to $15.50 an hour. So that's interesting ramifications if you think about it and what we're paying for startup employees. Because many of these people, you know, maybe busboys, they may be first level servers. It's not that they're our key people. But if that brings that bottom up and that moves out, the ripple effect of that could be really substantial. And in fact, we figured out that it will cost us $30,000 next year for a comparable number of people. So we're going to build in about $30,000 for if we have 7 new H-2B visa people back. So it varies depending on your area. It varies about the type of job, but you need to be aware of that. You also put an interesting little new rule into it, and it's that they've increased the requirements in terms of recruiting requirements. So in the past, when you basically recruited, you have to fill out, you have to advertise for a certain period of time, put that into your visa, into your application. Then when it's approved, you move forward. They've now changed the law, and in fact, you have to continue to advertise for that position up till 3 days before that employee starts work. So if I have somebody coming in from, say, South Africa, they arrive on the plane, and I'm going to give them maybe time to find their luggage, you know, if Steve gets his. And they get here, maybe they get settled, and they can start in a couple of days. I have to continue to look to replace them with a local worker 3 days before they arrive. It's somewhat preposterous, but it is part of the regulations. And so when they say that maybe they're trying to force this out, I think maybe there's some basis for that. And so there is an action, and the House and Senate have proposed a bill, strictly funding from the Department of Labor on this rule, and we'll see what happens. Meanwhile, fortunately, this rule, and because of the actions of NCA and the coalition, Workforce Coalition, H-2B Coalition, Workforce Coalition, they have postponed this until November. So we'll see what happens in November when they push it further. So on to the National Labor Relations Board. I think last year, Brad told us or reported that the board is starting to get a little heavily weighted towards the Obama administration goals, and in fact, he has appointed 3 in his term, 3 of the 5 board members to the board. The last one being Benny Becker, who was previously associate counsel to SEIU, and incidentally, SEIU, they were the largest contributor to the Obama campaigns. So suddenly there's a little more activity with regulations for rights and things, and we all recently received notification, and NCA was pushing this out as others suggested, that we've got to put a poster up. So there's some new requirements, a poster. This is the size of the poster, this is what it looks like. You can print this out or be available to you. And so we've got to post this next to all of our employee information, and essentially it tells the employee's rights. And it's employee's rights, for the most part, to join a union or to negotiate or to bring grievances against the club. As you work your way through this poster, it's the type of information that typically in the past, it was only when you had an active, not recruitment, but organizing activity going on, that you have to do it, or if you have an unfair labor practice. And so really what it does, though, is it tells all the employees what their rights are, and it suggests if you have a grievance or if you're unhappy, talk amongst yourselves, bring it to the club, or maybe go to union, or maybe go to LRB, and it just brings you along the line. So if you've got a disgruntled employee, there's a good chance that they might find something in this poster that they think they would like to do so. And it requires, if you post, wherever you post any information about recruitments and things, that you also put this. So if you have it on your website, you should put it on. And there's requirements that, in fact, if you've got the Spanish-speaking 20% or more, that you have to also put it in Spanish. So it just goes on and on. Just keep up with you. So something else, quickie election rule. This is an interesting new one. So there are now provisions that, in fact, if the union tries to organize or gets in and gets the required signatures, and that releases like 51% of the employees in the particular group, they can call for a quickie election, which can happen within 10 to 21 days. And so that would be something that the NLRB approves. And if you can well imagine, if that were to happen, the speed of this is always to the advantage of the union and against the organization. So you don't really have time to organize any kind of response to your employees given these situations. And so if you call for a quickie election and it went through, then there's furthermore difficulties because the new regulations also have a very fast track for negotiations. And in fact, if you don't find some kind of agreement, I think it's 60 to 90 days, then the NLRB can impose a contract on you for the coming year. And so these are just incredibly fast tracks. It hardly gives you the time in order to bring legal advice into it. And in fact, they also have all sorts of new provisions for law firms that handle legal matters, all sorts of reporting requirements. Who you're providing services to, what the fees you're providing services to. And so they're making it really onerous on the legal businesses. Is that my bell to go, or is it something new in this process? So I'm going to move along because I haven't run a little time. So the coalition, obviously, the coalition to try and stop these legislative issues from happening. And so we'll see how that goes. And so the NLRB has been active in some other ways, and there's a couple of suits going on. Let's bring that one up. It's a specialty health care group. Interesting. In the past, basically, you formed union, when the union went after a group, it really had to be a community of interest, a group that had similar interests. Now the rules have really gotten much more liberal, and you can really sort of break down within any labor group, smaller groups, and then try and organize them individually. In our areas, for example, union clubs, now the food and beverage workers typically are a union. And so you have food service people out front, you have kitchen people in the past, you have stewarding and some supporting roles and things like that. So now all that really you would need to do is to go after a small group, like if it was the food service people, let's get the waiters and waitresses together. And maybe we can exclude even the bus boys, maybe it's just the waiters. If you go in the kitchen, okay, let's get the cooks, maybe we exclude the utility people. So the union has the advantage of going in and narrowing the focus on the area where they have the most influence on, trying to form a union with those people, certify that group, and of course they're going to look to expand that later. And when you're fighting a union activity such as this, you always know that you typically want to expand the base, at least the employer does, and trying to bring in as many people that are sympathetic to your cause as you can. But this is an advantage that they now have. In this Roundy's situation, there's another aspect, and they really found some rulings relative to how you can continue to solicit, how the union can organize within your operation. If, in fact, you allow solicitation, if you have United Way, or if you bring blood drives and things like that allowed to come into your organization, then, in fact, you open up your organization, and it would be very difficult to keep out union organizers from coming to your workplace, from going to the break room, speaking to people on their off time. And it goes a little bit further because they're basically become very sympathetic to union logos, hats, buttons, and all the other things that typically in the organization they do later on, now right up front. So it's getting a little hairy there. And this thing with Boeing down in South Carolina. Boeing has a large plant in Washington. They're continuing to operate it. They're building a new plant. They've got some great tax advantages from South Carolina, and so they're planning on building a new plant down there. And so basically, on a complaint by the unions, NLRB is suing them to stop them from building a new plant. The idea, I guess, is that it might be in an area where they wouldn't organize. It is not
moving a plant. They are not closing down their existing one in Washington. They're simply starting a new one. And so that's considered somewhat of an unfair labor practice, and they're trying to stop them from being able to do that. So fortunately, Congress is trying to get in on this now and sort of say, well, look, we'll pass some legislation to at least stop that abuse of this. But that's just trying to pass legislation because we still have a very hard road to hoe. So there's a lot of activities, a lot of ways that the NLRB, the DOL, can affect what's happening to us. And I mentioned a little bit about the gag rule before, and the requirements that the employers have, the law firms have in terms of reporting this type of work, and that's something we have to deal with. So together we got, more aggravated or potentially more aggravated workers because of the employee posters. We can target smaller subsets of the employees for organization. We have a quicker official method of having elections that the people will be able to come onto your property for that purpose with little restriction, and it's less likely to enter any kind of opposition because we have not too much support from potentially labor, our attorneys going forward. So it's a little dismal, that kind of report. So that's why they sort of stuck me out here, I think, and Brad was someplace else, and Sue went to the hospital. I think it's bad. I'm pretty much out of time, but in conclusion, I really want to mention, so my call to action here is, you see on the center of your page, of your table, there's an application. If you're not an NCA member, I certainly encourage you to join the NCA. If you're up for renewal, please renew for the NCA. In the 2009 MGA survey, the average club spends about $100,000 on property and casualty insurance, and additional for directors and officers and all the other stuff. Membership in the NCA is about $1,500 on average. That's 1.5%. I always like to look at the NCAs out there as an insurance policy for you. You know, it's a small amount of money to have somebody down in Washington, one working for you, to see that try and head off some of these activities. Number two, though, to come back to you and make sure that you're prepared for them when they do arrive and that you don't get yourself in trouble. With an average deductible of about $5,000, you know, all you have to do is just save one little suit, stay out of trouble just one time, and you will have paid for several years of your membership. So, last thing you can do is, if you have H-2B, you can contribute to the H-2B Workforce Coalition, and you can do that through NCA as well.